we've been making movies about neophyte filmmakers, and the form with which you engage the film is their own finished movie. And so not only does that give you license to do a lot of things that are cheap, like, we can't spend money on cool things like slider dollies or even tripods, which you can't set up in public places. It lets us shoot them like they are just almost like reality television shows, but even lower budget than that. Reality television shows shot by kids.
What this guy was talking about right here is how a lot of young and broke filmmakers can still make movies.
Matt Johnson is the writer, director, and star of 2013's The Dirties, 2016's Operation Avalanche, and the recently released banger Blackberry, starring Glenn Howerton and Jay Baruchel. Now, if you like tight and intense dramas with effortless comedy sprinkled in, chances are you're going to like at least one of these movies. So if this guy's so good, why haven't I heard of him? Well, the subject of his films are not theoretically the most marketable. The Dirties follows a troubled high schooler who contemplates carrying out a school shooting, and Operation Avalanche follows a CIA documentary crew stuck in a conspiracy involving the moon landing, so it's no surprise that these taboo topics feel off limits. What makes them so effective, however, is that Johnson never resorts to shock value or story gimmicks to generate headlines, but instead places you in the mind of his characters by putting you right in the room with them. He knows exactly how to maneuver the camera, how to direct his actors, and how to edit his stories to not mimic, but genuinely feel like archival home videos of people you know. Now, this isn't exactly new. Similar styles have been popular for decades, but very few have taken this exact route. Previous approaches of camera-acknowledging mockumentaries, thrilling horrors, and narrative dramas shot with documentary cinematography all use the camera to aggressively involve the audience, but their characters always feel just like that, characters. Even the best found footage movies often still lack that extra punch to make it genuinely human. However, as cameras of all kinds continue to be more accessible to everyday people, I think it's only a matter of time before the smallest moments and equipment make the biggest impacts on indie film. My name is Brian, and welcome to Hot Strike.
This is Burkittsville, formerly Blair.
All right, let's escort the elephant out of the room right now. Blair Witch Project is the obvious foundation for mainstream found footage as a whole. And I mean, it is every first-time producer's wet dream. It's an ultra-low-budget indie darling that captivated millions and made a shit ton of money. With a daring ad campaign and a festival run for the ages, its success spawned hundreds of imposters, some just as revolutionary as the inspiration, and some not so much. In recent times, it honestly feels like found footage has been relegated to nothing more than a cheap horror gimmick instead of its own unique genre. So, rather than disparage a plethora of movies, I'd rather look at the specific traits that make the style so special. But first, what even is found footage? Don't fret, TikTok kids. I'll tell you. Back in my day, when we used to sacrifice a big purple dinosaur as a peace offering to the gods, VHS was not a retro filter that you just slapped onto the beginning of your video essay, but a cutting-edge technology for normal people to film their lives with way less restrictions than 8mm film.
Look what just popped up. The new Sony Handycam. A video camera recorder so tiny, it fits in one hand.
Now, I grew up in the era of mini-DV, which was the technological advancement after VHS. These tapes were about 1/8 the size of a VHS tape, and they allowed you to record about 60 to 90 minutes worth of footage before they ran out. In order to edit these, however, you would have to take your tape or collection of tapes and then re-record your favorite parts or the best parts onto a new tape before computers made the process a whole lot easier. And while you were always trying to cut out all of the mistakes and your parents bickering back and forth for 45 minutes,
I am pissed.
These raw tapes had and still have a beautifully unrefined quality to them. Every accidental recording, crash zoom, or little camera shake was done by someone, not an ethereal camera operator. The person wielding the camera was represented in the footage, most of all in the edit, where you decided to start and stop the recording told the story in and of itself. The feeling of stumbling upon a small cassette tucked away in some memento box, loading it into your camera VCR, and unearthing an unfiltered collection of forgotten memories is the fundamental basis of the found footage genre. But let's not put the horse on top of the cart here. Before there were really good fictionalized documentaries, there were great real ones.
Cinema Vérité. And to define this, a reading from a textbook that I was required to purchase in college. In the 1950s, changes in documentary practices followed the technological developments of lightweight 16mm cameras, which allowed filmmakers a new kind of spontaneity and inventiveness when capturing reality. Most dramatic was the Cinema Vérité movement that appeared in France at this time, whereby a cinema truth was achieved through the use of lightweight cameras to record daily life and public events. Thank you, former me. This was worth $130.
Documentaries like Salesman, Gimme Shelter, Shelter in Grey Gardens, a film about two old ladies bickering in their rundown mansion that I detested at first and revere now, built the visual and editorial language for this genre over half a century ago. The early entries shared a few similar characteristics. There were typically no retrospective interviews to narrate or guide the story, only live reactions. The camera crew was often involved, but the audience rarely, if ever, saw them. And most importantly, these films feel extremely intimate because the camera is tight enough to capture every small thought. Now, since they typically follow real people with fierce idiosyncrasies, these films can be hard to digest. But if you're looking for an easy entry into the style of filmmaking, look no further than D.A. Pennebaker.
Hey man, I'm not kidding you. You think I'm kidding?
Now, as a longtime Dylan fan, Don't Look Back is my #1 favorite documentary. Looking at it from today's lens, it opens with the foundation of all music videos before taking one of music's biggest icons and reminding you that he too was once a 23-year-old kid, just with way more going on. Then you factor in that this was shot in 1967, which was before Blonde on Blonde, and even before Bob met Chum Lee, and you realize how special of a time capsule this is. Pennebaker has also covered plenty of other musicians and concerts you're likely to love, and each time he presents these larger-than-life stars as the people they primarily are. If you're, say, not into music and somehow only into politics, well, don't worry, I guess. DA's got you covered. The War Room is a fascinating look into Clinton's 1992 presidential run from the perspective of his campaign, and Primary, a tight 60-minute about JFK's bid for the Democratic nomination, is arguably the film that actually birthed this modern technique of intimate storytelling. Pennebaker has a quote that captures this entire form perfectly. You don't necessarily need a script or actors to tell a compelling tale. Finding a person at a key moment in his life and rendering the truth as you see it, that's the truest form of drama. While his documentaries and many like them captured true authenticity of real humans, it was only a matter of time before some clever filmmakers used this style to breathe a new degree of life into their characters.
It's time to set convoluted parameters for this discussion.
Is found footage a genre, style, or form? I thought putting this hat on would give me the answer, but I honestly don't know, and truth be told, I don't think it matters all that much. At the end of the day, it doesn't really fundamentally change the story you're experiencing, nor does it really capture the full scope of the style. Instead, I actually think it's easier to identify where you are in the spectrum of fictional documentaries with one simple question. How aware are the characters?
At the first layer, they're oblivious. Of the cameras, that is.
There's a nice way to say that, Vinny.
At this level, you're still in whatever genre you thought you were in. The creators are just using these techniques to ramp up the intensity of the story. One of the most innovative films to kick off this current era of shooting is The Big Short, but these have been around since at least the 60s. John Cassavetes mortgaged his house to make movies this way, so you can tell that these artists are true film nuts. Now, I won't get into The Big Short here because it deserves a breakdown all of its own, but Adam McKay's other thing, Succession, has single-handedly created newfound mainstream appeal for the style. Matt Johnson's Blackberry also slots in nicely here as a natural evolution in his filmography, and I find it hilarious that his first film that isn't a found footage fictional documentary is a biopic. The production aspects certainly have the refined quality of a bigger budget, but his last minute, strewn together, frenetic energy still rings through. A common trait in all of these movies and shows is that the handheld camera often pans, bumps, finds focus, and feels like it's spying on the characters, which are usually well developed with tightly interlaced drama and snappy dialogue.
Hey, motherfuckers.
It's constantly moving and moving quickly because the mere rhythm of the images is enough to keep you engaged.
The caveat is, these stories are still one layer of fiction. Yeah, the cinematography looks great, and it could certainly evoke a sense of realness, but it's technically no more than a visual style.
These movies feel like documentaries in the same way that Fellini's 8.5 feels like a dream, but both are still the same amount of fiction. When you decide to add a layer of fiction to Vérité narratives, the camera itself becomes a character. It can be passed around from lead to lead, wielded by the quiet friend, or it can be held by you, the completely silent and nameless operator praying that you don't get in trouble for filming this. Now, first up are mockumentaries, which are probably the most accessible entries of this style to the common viewer. These are inherently comedies that satirize documentary tropes in unique ways, whether in style or in subject. These protagonists are typically goofy, silly, and/or clumsy, and the supporting cast are usually hilarious oddballs. Christopher Guest will forever be the mockumentary godfather, but if Andy Samberg made more, he could challenge the throne.
So sit back and watch how it's done, my friend.
After that, we have the largest swath of the market, found footage horrors. Done often, but rarely done to maximum effect. They usually start promisingly enough with the shakiest camera imaginable, but the climax is usually the camera still on the ground as our underdeveloped protagonist gets killed off screen. Blair Witch and the first Paranormal Activity are the cream of the crop, but I'd love to see a modern, refreshed take on this played out trope. I also have to make this point. I think a series like The Purge missed out big time by not being found footage. You could have forever recycled a single Purge night and made every iteration a new set of characters documenting their night with a body cam or security cams, or even have a documentary crew follow a criminal, and you would have made much smaller crimes have the same impact as all of the crazy costumes and murders. But you know what? What do I know? This is cool too. These two genres are iconic in their own rights, but there's still only one layer of fiction deeper than Vérité narratives. The characters are aware that they're being filmed, sure, but they aren't quite aware that they are human. In mockumentaries, the actors are always playing extremely expressive archetypes because it's the irony of larger-than-life personality feeling like it was captured organically that makes every punchline hit harder. In a lot of found footage horrors, the characters are still doing the most obvious horror shit, but they use the style as a bit of flavor. There's still lots of bad decision-making, oblivious characters, and of course, jump scares, but now with night vision. There may be flashes of the storytelling vehicle being pushed to its maximum potential, but these movies typically revert to the tropes of their larger genres. However, the layer beyond these genres is where my favorite films live, and they are what I hope the future of film includes more of. Fictional found footage documentary is probably the most realistic term for what I have in mind, but it doesn't really have the best ring to it, does it? I mean, yeah, they are fictional documentaries because these written narratives star self-aware protagonists who are constantly acknowledging the camera, the crew, and the fact that they're being documented, sure, but that feels a little bit too formal for the scope of the stories. Plus, found footage, which is the essence of the style, has been a bit of an outdated term ever since the cloud started harvesting our videos for energy before launching the scraps back at us. Instead, I would like to introduce you to a new term, one that is so pretentious that no one will take you seriously at all if you use it, but it best captures what I'm thinking. Hyperreal Vérité. My college textbook defines hyperreal vérité as the dramatized evolution of cinema verité. This creative method features fictional films, television, and internet content that attempt to authentically replicate the visual and emotional aspects of everyday people capturing real life. Movies are notorious for being difficult to describe with just one term, so I wanted to find something that felt like it covered enough bases while still leaving room open for any story that fits the bill. I mean, that's why I decided to call it a method of storytelling rather than a style, because the defining traits of other projects are just another piece of the puzzle here. Now, since you've already mastered the history of cinema verité, you understand the intense camera and editing style that built the foundation of these films. You also know that my favorite documentary, Don't Look Back, was released before people even orbited the moon. So it's safe to say that the term hasn't fully evolved with the times. And I mean, come on, in the last 20 years alone, lightweight cameras capable of easily recording high-quality video went from being an expensive luxury to a small price bump for 3 dots instead of 2. We also now have webcams, security cams, backup cams, turn signal cams, dash cams, doorbell cams, and soon, iCams. On a day-to-day basis, we massively underestimate how much subliminal information we process and store subconsciously to help us understand the next video we may consume. A century ago, we really only had to comprehend the flashing pictures on the big screen, but now we have to absorb a 5-second short film before the 10-minute compilation short film of the short films that will make you laugh and or lose. Every single camera brings a unique visual and editorial language with it that changes how and what you perceive. I mean, after all, you're not going to critically examine an Instagram story with the same level of attention as you would Lawrence of Arabia. One of these is a quickly captured fleeting moment of time, and the other one was made to withstand the test. Unless, of course, that's the whole point. You ever seen a painting so crisp you're convinced it's a photograph? That's photorealism. Though a human-made piece of art, the lack of perceptible strokes can trick you from a distance. Photoreal art is impressive, gorgeous, and extremely limited. The whole point is an objective recreation of what is in front of you. Hyperrealism is the step beyond that. It's portraying life so accurately that it feels unreal, because it's not real. You know, the artist is capturing the subject alongside the essence and the feelings of the entire experience. Does that make sense? The best way that I can think to explain hyperreal is with Formula In. Over the last few seasons, the drivers have slowly started integrating helmet cams to show what they see on track, and this is what they see. Now, while the camera looks like it's producing a reading on the Richter scale, the drivers don't notice most of these bumps because their brains are constantly smoothing out the rapid changes in road condition. Your eyes do this while driving too. The footage just didn't look cool enough to include in the video. Which one of these is reality? Is it the shaking camera that barely produces a coherent image, or is it the driver's personally stabilized experience? Normal movies opt for easily comprehensible and digestible narratives. That's the smooth version, like my brain. Whereas documentaries attempt to present objective facts, the turbulent. It's in the middle where we find hyperreal verité trying to share outright truth from a subjective perspective. These movies hijack a specific language and use all of its traits, not just the most easily identifiable, as the vehicle for the story. Every shot attempts to recreate the practical way in which the specific camera and person would have captured this moment. While hyperreal verité doesn't sound any better the more that I say it,
It feels well balanced. Vérité sets the stage for the visuals and equipment, but everything is hyper-real, from the characters to the story beats to the editing. Details that are too insignificant to waste time on in traditional plots have become the focal point here. Plus, it could be any genre, so long as that the story revolves around overtly human characters capturing their perspective of what's happening.
Whether it's intimate portraits of unique people, monster movies, or even the accidental destruction of your parents' wedding tape, all of these movies share the same frequency. Operation Avalanche is my all-time favorite entry, but it would be a disservice to you if I reveal any more of that movie than I already have. There are so many small twists and turns that if you can go in completely blind, it'll only captivate you more. If you watch that and like what Matt Johnson has to say about America in the 60s, you're probably gonna like what he has to say about America today. I truly believe that if I sat 100 unknowing people in a theater, Americans included, and told them that The Dirties was newly released evidence in a school shooting case, they'd believe it's real footage. And they also wouldn't believe a Canadian made this. Once again, it's a movie that requires more than a sentence in this video essay to fully break down, so I'll save that for a possible Matt Johnson video in the future. For now, all you need to know is that his freshman and sophomore features as a filmmaker are what I consider to be the crown jewel of all hyper-real Vérité. There are also some well-known classics. Chronicle was a smash cult hit, Cloverfield is the peak of the franchise, and Project X is still one of the greatest high school movies of all time.
Give me back my fucking nose!
But there are also some deep cuts that help scratch that itch further. Remember what I was saying about making The Purge good? Yeah, that movie kind of exists. It's called Man Bites Dog. You want a high school time travel movie? Project Almanac will remind you that Imagine Dragons was just as massive in 2013. Hot Strike legend Orson Welles literally died in the pursuit of the perfect hyper-real Vérité film, so The Other Side of the Wind is a must-watch. Most importantly, if you ask me, Surf's Up counts.
There's honestly only one cardinal rule that will exclude you from this elite club should you break it. You cannot deviate course. You cannot start the story using hyper-real techniques just to abandon it for some juicy cinematic climax. I cannot stand this.
You spend an hour and 15 minutes watching an intimate friend group document their lives with beautiful amateur camera work, and then all of a sudden you have access to every camera feed in town. Did our protagonist personally license this footage from all of these angles? I don't think so. It looks like shit!
Alright, so now that we have a rough idea of what's been eating away at me at night, we can now skip over living in the present and just catapult ourselves directly into the future. I truly believe that the circumstances are ripe for this method of storytelling to lead the next generation of indie filmmakers. It's gotten pretty easy over the last couple years to ridicule the superfluous $100 million budgets, but even low-budget indie filmmaking has gotten extremely expensive. For example, Whiplash, the low-budget Sundance darling that kickstarted Damien Chazelle's career, still cost $3.3 million to make.
Jesus fucking Christ!
I know that doesn't sound like a lot to film people, but in normal money terms, that's still a lot of cheddar. Modern consumer cameras are cheaper, easier to use, and more accessible than they've ever been. Plus, there are now free editing softwares that don't require you to do arts and crafts in order to finish a project. There has never been an easier time to start producing visual entertainment than right now. You just have to do it right. I emphasize do it right because when I was in college, my professors used to piss me off all the time when they'd say like, "Oh, if I had a camera in my pocket at your age, I would be the next American Kurosawa." Yeah, I know I could shoot a feature on my iPhone. You know what the problem with that is? It looks like it was shot on a fucking iPhone. Some of my classmates were dropping hundreds of thousands of dollars on thesis films that look like best cinematography winners. We weren't even in the same league. But then it dawned on me, what if I made a movie that didn't look good? What if I made a movie that was deliberately filmed so poorly that it was part of the story? What if the whole movie was about making a movie that looked like shit? See where I'm going? Last summer, with the help of some friends that I'm forever indebted to, we made a 95-minute hyper-real Vérité feature film. It's currently being soundmixed, so I'm not going to reveal too much more than that, but it's the very reason why I see this method of filmmaking as the future. Now, we really just wanted to make a feature, but we only had 3 camera options to choose from. One is my A7S II with an outdated kit lens that required lighting. The other was an iPhone, which looks like an iPhone. And the third option was my childhood mini DV camera. Now, we went with mini DV because it gave us the most amount of texture with the least amount of work, but it also gave us an excellent framework to play in. What does this modern moment look like if it's filmed by 3 degenerates on a camera from the early 2000s? We couldn't just operate at normal levels of found footage. The characters had to be as aware of the fact that this old camera was filming them as we would be in real life. We still took the project extremely seriously. I mean, it took me 2 years to write, but we still managed to make it in under 2 weeks and for less than $5,000, or 1/660th of Whiplash.
Count again.
The expenses were tapes, meals, sound equipment, and other miscellaneous production stuff. We saved money by operating with 0 lighting, crew, and extra nonsense. We turned what we had and who we were into the whole story, and that was the most fulfilling part. Does the small budget and ragtag team make our project any less than a normal movie? Honestly, that's up for you to decide. Hollywood's kind of in a weird spot right now where it just seems like you throw money at the problem and it doesn't even solve it. But I could still see why anything that didn't feel crisp, clean, vetted, and tested for your viewing pleasure may feel abrasive. But for those of you who don't feel represented by the heroes, the feel-good stories, or the cinematic epics, those of you who want to feel yourselves up on screen communicating the way that you do, I just have one question for you. What are you doing with that camera in your pocket?